Okay, everyone, another year and another session with Bruno Aziza and Bernard Marr, where we will be looking back at the month in tech, AI, and data science. How are you, Bruno?
I'm doing great. I can see you through my VR glasses. I wish I could see you in 3D, but I know we're going to talk about this. You've been doing a bunch of work on the metaverse, so I know people are wondering what these are, and we'll get to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
you can see my one hanging on the wall behind me.
this.
Um,
I'll have to do
yes,
a session like this at some point.
I've also got the latest HTC one.
Ooh, very
So
nice.
they sent me this to have a look at. So I'm trying this out at the moment.
Are they different from this, or what's the?
Yes, I think the latest HTC is the resolution is slightly better and the speed is slightly better, but I think the Oculus are great. Anyone who wants to start their VR experience, I think this is a good start. We actually took our VR headsets away over Christmas. After Christmas we went away for a week's of vacation, and my best friend, he's got VR glasses as well, and it was lovely. So we just we explored different games, and one of the games that we loved is table tennis. So it
Yes, I
feels
play that one.
so real, and now I end up playing table tennis with people on VR all over the world, which is pretty cool.
It's funny. There's at least three use cases for this thing that are really interesting. I think the first one is if you're on the younger generation, of course, you got new games like Saber games and others that are really quite amazing. Table tennis as well is incredibly realistic. I mean, the feedback you get on the wrist is really quite cool. The second use case I've found is I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos that are 3D, and it's amazing the sense of perspective. I mean, some of those, you almost get dizzy just living through the YouTube movie itself through the VR. And then the final one, which I think is pretty brilliant, is it's also great for people that have old games that they love. Like, for instance, my wife loves Fruit Ninja.
Mhm.
And so my wife is not a gamer at all. And a couple of nights this weekend, I came back. I had dinner for work and a few other activities. I played soccer one of the nights, and I saw her in the living room playing Fruit Ninja with my Oculus, which is pretty cool. My son also has one, and we play a tennis, ping pong with him, and he also has boxing games that are really quite intense. The one thing I will tell you though, that I think we're not quite there with, is the weight. These are pretty like if you start doing boxing or if you want to watch like a 2 hour movie on this, it's it's pretty. I mean, you come out and your face is kind of a little bit bruised, and if
Yes,
you start sweating because you're doing boxing, uh,
yeah.
it's a bad
And with
combination.
the HTC, it basically looks better on your head. So this is for more action games and sports. I think is quite good.
Yeah.
But I agree. What what I recently wrote about is HTC again released a new version of glasses, and they look pretty much like sunglasses, and they look cool. They're really lightweight, so you put them on, and they've got a little mirror front, and basically you connect them to your phone, and then you get this immersive VR experience, but they look like normal glasses. So I guess, and they are designed for this new 5G world where you walk out, you go anywhere, and you then, for example, if you're on a bus or on a plane and you want the VR experience, you want to watch movies like you were in a movie theater, you can do that easily, which is, I think, a really nice. This is all going to happen with Apple releasing their headset at some point. So this is all exciting stuff that will transform our world and help to create this metaverse experience that everyone is talking about at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean it connects well with one of the topics I know people have asked us to talk about is the trends in 2020. I know you wrote a bunch about the metaverse and what is it and why it matters and so forth. And so I wanted to get you started with that. What's the deal with the metaverse? Why does it matter, and how is it different from the other concepts you're
Yeah, so
suggesting?
I think the metaverse is like so many concepts that we had before, big data, AI. Suddenly you have a word that you can grasp that tries to sell you the idea. And we've had virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality for many years now, and everyone knew that this is going to be a massive trend. I last year I published my book Extended Reality in Practice, which is all about how companies actually use these technologies to reimagine everything from how they interact with customers to how healthcare is delivered, how manufacturing is done, how tourism will change in the future, and hospitality. So a mix of augmented and virtual reality. And I guess this metaverse idea is that the idea of creating this consistent digital universe, because at the moment you have lots of point solutions. So if you wanted to go on holiday and explore Rome using augmented reality, you can do this. You can use your phone, you can put headsets on, you can wear augmented reality glasses, or you use just the camera of your phone, point at different places. It will then bring them to life. It will tell you all about them. You have virtual gaming environments, you have virtual social media environments. And I guess the idea with the metaverse is that you have, let's say you haven't, my kids play video games, they play Rocket League, for example, which is this game where you play soccer in an arena with cars. And they actually spend quite a lot of their pocket money on certain cars and certain wheels that you can basically change your car. And we're seeing this now in the metaverse, that people buy avatars. So we see this in skins and Fortnite, another game that my kids play, where you buy skins, and companies like Gucci are already selling Gucci labeled skins in Fortnite. And so the whole idea is that if I buy a really cool Gucci outfit for Fortnite, I then might want to wear this in Rocket League and other places and in social media. So my avatar, the idea of the metaverse is that you can take things from one place to the other and have this more consistent experience across multiple applications. And for me, there's a huge opportunity for brands, especially luxury brands, to sell us things, because we have this in the real world. We already have this in games, and if we want this in the metaverse, we want cool clothes, we want cool cars, and we want to drive them across all our digital platforms.
Yeah, and there are two things that I think are interesting about this movement. The first one is what you're saying, this idea that now we've got this extended world where we could do things that we could do in our world, but maybe we could do even more. We could fly, we could do all these things that you can't do in the physical world. And what I think is interesting there is, of course, it's creating all types of economies and opportunities for people to kind of explore what they can't explore here in the physical world. The second thing is an indication in how we're going to interact with technology moving forward. I was actually talking to my mom this morning. You know that when after I go to the gym in the morning, I take my dog for a walk and I call my mom, and so we solve some of the biggest world's problems on that walk. And one of them today was this idea of what is reality. And it was interesting that the Matrix movie came out because you could get meta on the metaverse, right? If is reality to think I'm living here, or is reality to think I'm living? Is there reality? And how could you recreate the impression of reality? Right now, this thing just has vision, but what if it has touches? I mean, people are working on gloves right now that gives you the sense of touch. And what if it had smell? What if it had taste? Ultimately, would we actually travel if we had devices and experiences that just completely emulate the impression that we have of this, us touching things, is what we call reality here?
And absolutely. And for me, I start my book on extended reality, on what actually is reality. And one of the questions I always ask myself is, if I see the color red, and how do you see the color red? Because you might see the same physical reflection, but your brain creates something completely different that looks very different to what I see. And in this new world, if you have augmented reality glasses, or at some point contact lenses, you can change the world around you too. You can make your neighbor's house change color, you can make someone's car change color, and you see it differently to or in the way you want to see it, which is quite fascinating. And I guess at some point, lots of the companies that are into VR are also looking at brain-computer interfaces. So instead of having VR goggles that are somehow creating smells, wouldn't it be cool if they can connect to your smell receptors in your brain and automatically send you the signals to smell something, to see something, which then really starts to blur the lines between reality and not.
Exactly. And I see some comments from Mike on, how does this connect with mesh? It's we're going to touch on that because the data mesh is definitely the term of 2022 in the world of data, but it is really related to this idea is, what is your perception of reality when you look at the same data? Are you seeing the same thing? So we'll definitely talk about that. But just to connect on the brain interface comment you made, one of the topics I covered was the predictions this year in tech in 2022. This is a magazine, a book actually I discovered over the holidays. I was traveling to Seattle and I picked this up at the airport. And one of the biggest trends that they're seeing in the next 10 years is this idea of brain interfaces for just about everything. Of course, our consumer experiences, but our work experience with data and how we kind of control or engage with the world around us. So if you haven't been able to catch this book is a great one. And also you can catch the summary I gave on the biggest trends on that.
What's this called, just in case someone is listening rather than watching?
Yes, it's called The Year in Tech 2022. It's Harvard Business Review.
Very
It's
good.
kind of, what I read religiously is this one, The World Ahead in 2022 by The Economist. I'm a big reader of The Economist. And, for the last, as long as I can remember, every year I get this, and it's great because it's got, articles of people that think about the future and also people that analyze what happened this past year. And I also covered it on one of my Sunday updates where I explain how do you read The Economist. And so I'll put those links as well in here so people get a sense. But if you're looking to get some rational views on predictions, these two, I think, are a great place to start. Of course, you don't have to spend hours reading them. I provided a summary for each on my weekly CarCast. So I'll make sure to put the links here. Great ways to just get away from the noise. There's a lot of articles in December. December is the prediction month where everybody is trying to get their prediction in, and it can be quite confusing. And it turns out, if you look at the data, some of the surveys I released, it really kind of gravitates around just a few trends that you should pay attention to if you're in the data world. So we'll cover that in a little bit here.
Yeah, and for me, the metaverse is a massive trend, and very closely related to the metaverse is this idea of Web3. So a new iteration of the internet. I think the Web 1 is when we had the internet that was basically just a read-only environment where companies and governments put information out and you could find this and read it. Web 2 was then the user-generated content with the emergence of social media, where we now had Facebook and Twitter and podcasts and streams, and people could generate content and interact much more. And I guess the idea of Web 3 is that this becomes a bit more decentralized. And lots of people that talk about the word of the metaverse also talk about Web3 and how blockchain technology in particular could almost decentralize the control, because at the moment all the infrastructure is controlled by big companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon, and the idea of the decentralized web is that we basically, no one owns it. We have this like based on blockchain technology where they are distributed across lots of different servers, and this also gives us the opportunity to have transactions without middlemen. So you can pay people. I think the rise of NFTs, for example, non-fungible tokens, is related to this, and lots of brands that I currently talk to and advise is, especially luxury brands, are now thinking, how can I enter this new world, this digital world? If I wanted to sell a a Dolce and Gabbana or a Louis Vuitton bag or a Ferrari car in the metaverse, how can I then make this rare and non-fungible tokens are one way of doing this, that you then have a digital ownership certificate, which is really interesting because it starts to make digital things rare and collectible.
Yeah, and there's this whole idea of distributed control. The thing I think to think about is this idea of trust, right? The reason for why you have these in banking, particularly why you have these banks, is that not just provide the ability to distribute, but also the idea of trust. You know that this transaction is logged. You know to trust the ledger and so forth. So I think that's the kind of the important concept to think about. What's the role for decentralized? Oh my gosh, my dog is losing it. Let me open the door for him.
No problem.
And I want to make sure that we go through the comments here. People here are asking about how this relates to the data mesh and so forth. And so this idea of distributed environments is an important one as well that we probably should touch on. Mike, I see here, is interested in talking about that. We got quite a few people here from all over the world, actually.
Yeah, which is good. Yeah, do you want to start talking about the data mesh then?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it because there are a few reasons for why I think this is important for this audience. And I called it the 3 Ds of the data mesh. Three things to look for. When you look for information on this topic, you're going to find the disciples of the data mesh, who are the folks that really looked at the original paper that was written a few years ago by Zamak. She's a consultant at a company called ThoughtWorks. And she really kind of looked at the monolithic environment that IT had created for data and realized the limitations of data lakes and centralized data warehouse, and realizing that in fact your data is distributed. So how do you create innovation at the edge while creating this idea of centralized governance, even though maybe not all the data might be in just one centralized place? And so you'll find the disciples of that are staying true to that definition. Then what you'll find is the second D of the data mesh is you'll find the distractors, the folks that will say that, this idea, this concept existed before. There's nothing new here. And I think, while some of the components of the data mesh are leaning on concepts that we're familiar with in the past, there is this new notion that is enabled by new technology, particularly cloud is enabling for the creation of this distributed environment a lot more easily, and able to connect them with the central architecture created by organization is definitely a new concept. And so I would kind of challenge that view of saying that there's nothing new about the data mesh. I think there are some great new ideas, and I wrote an article on this last night on VentureBeat that kind of takes you to resources, particularly people that have done it successfully. The CIO of L'Oreal, for instance, has written 2 great blogs on the topic of one. The first blog is, how does he think about it? And second is, what is the actual implementation of the data mesh? And I think we need to focus on that now rather than argue the terminology. Is let's look at examples, let's our architectural guidance, so we can all get there and make progress. Another couple of authors I think about people should follow is Eric Broda, who had published some great examples of design patterns, if you will, for data mesh architecture, and my friend Andrew Bruss, who wrote a whole piece on how to think about it. So that's the second D, is this, the folks are going to say there's nothing new here. And I think there is a lot of newness and certainly enabled by new technology. And then the third one that really I think everyone should be worried about is the distorters, and they might do it intentionally. I don't think that's the majority of them. I think it's just maybe not reading the paper truthfully, is the folks that maybe have a solution that it's in the neighborhood of enabling the data mesh, and they'll tell you, hey, just buy my product and then you'll get a data mesh. I think we've all been in technology here long enough to know that that rarely exists, where there's a new concept that comes in and the one vendor has the one button and it gives you the whole solution. So I think that's what I would watch out for. Again, I'll put the link to the VentureBeat article where I talk about what is the data mesh, where does it come from, what are the implications for you if you're a data leader, and what you need to watch out for. I think we're at a tipping point here where this concept is getting a lot of traction. and it certainly is helping leaders who are willing to start now sharing their successes. So it will help people here in the community kind of bridge this gap that we started to talk about, where how can you get the benefit of centralization without the disadvantages of decentralization?
Very, yeah, super interesting, and definitely a big trend to watch. Another one that I'm seeing more and more is this idea of creating data like lake houses. So there's whole idea that you're creating a hybrid of a data lake and a data warehouse, where like in the beginning we had data warehouses and they captured our structured data really well, and this was all good for business intelligence and reporting. Then came along all our unstructured data, and we needed to find new ways of storing this data because it didn't fit into the structure of a data warehouse. So we created data lakes. Unfortunately, lots of data lakes resemble more of a data swamp than a data lake, where people just dump all data into it. And what more and more organizations are now thinking is that they're creating a semantic layer in the middle to create more intelligence, especially using artificial intelligence to automate or automatically categorize unstructured data and create a structure that makes it then more usable. And I think that's definitely a trend that is going to be big this year. And
Absolutely. And it is representative of what's happening with organizations where there's the convergence of a few key workloads that are going to impact the architecture choices that you make in the next 5 years if you're a data leader. The first one is what you talked about here, right? The convergence of workloads or data types where a data warehouse and a data lake come together to provide, accessible data to your organization. The second one is, the convergence of business intelligence and artificial intelligence, coming together where the tools of the past that were dashboards and, were kind of either static or available with filtering and so forth, now becoming intelligent, where they're enabling more people to ask more questions, but they're also now enabling people to resolve more problems by suggesting maybe this is the question you should ask, maybe this is the action you should take. So there we could see the convergence of these workloads, real time and batch coming together is another trend. And of course, a world of multiple clouds coming together is going to, so you get the convergence of all these things. I would say for all of this though, you've got to be careful not to fall in the narrative of a vendor that's trying to sell you a solution and is going to bring now major disadvantages to the problem that you're trying to solve. This is why, to me, the trend, or at least the discussion that should be probably the most impactful for organization, is the idea of the data mesh, because it enables you to think about the organizational footprint. How do I organize myself as an organization if I want to take full advantage of the data that I'm creating? And what we've seen is there's at least three phases organizations go through, and they are quite different from each other. In fact, what's interesting, last week, I was talking about this idea like the data mesh is not the beginning and it's not the end. And what I meant by that is the data mesh actually is not the goal, is not the end goal. It is a vehicle by which you're going to get to the end goal. And I think the end goal is you want to create data products, right? If you want to be a data company, if you believe that your number one asset is your data and you're going to be a data company, the end goal is a data product. The question is, how do you get there? The first stage typically tends to be creating the foundational architecture in order to see all the data that you need in order to take advantage of it. And your data is going to be across multiple clouds. Your data is going to be across on-premise and cloud. Your data is going to be in lakes. Your data is going to be in data warehousing. It's going to be in data mart. So you want to have something that's flexible enough. So this is where people start talking about cataloging technology and HTOP architecture, where you could bring analytical and transactional workloads together. But you cannot forget about this first step. This is a critical work step. And maybe the lakehouse fits in this world here, where you're trying to bring workloads together and it's useful. But then the next step is the step of data mesh, where now that you have this foundation, you've cataloged the data, you can discover it, you do have to start governing it. And so how do you now govern distributed data in with central policies that can enable innovation at the edge? And I think that that's what the data mesh allows us to do. After the data mesh is this phase of now creating data products. How do you repeatedly now take your architectural design, which is foundational structure, your organizational design, so it's your here it's your data, if you will, here it's your people, and how do you bring that now into a set of processes that you can build fraud analytics at scale, and you can build anomaly detection at scale, and you can build all these products that are repeatable solutions that your people can use, and sometimes you can even monetize. This is where we start talking about data sharing and semantic layers and so forth, because this idea of repeatability of solution that really has been an issue for organizations. And so I think, a lot of these buzzwords, might be scary. I think I would keep if I was a data leader today trying to figure this out, I'd keep my eye on the prize, which is the end goal is building data products that are enabling innovation at scale at your organization. The data lakehouse might be one step, the data mesh is the next step, and maybe, you got the final step there that gets you to really running on data, if you will.
Very true. I very much agree. I was just, while you were talking, I was trying to read through some of my
Some of
articles.
the comments, yeah, I see we've got some engagement here. The data swamp, I think, is a great analogy, because I think when you think about the issue of a lake or a lake house that is not being tapped into, it has the risk of becoming a data swamp. And I think that what's interesting about the data mesh concept is it pushes us to think about active data versus passive data, right? So the problem with the data swamp is you have all the data, but it's sitting there and nobody's doing it, so it's very passive. Whereas an active data would be a stage, if you will, where your people are actually able to innovate on top of that. And so, I released two surveys at the end of the year to kind of get a pulse on what are some of the top trends that, one, surprised people in 2021, and two, think are going to be important trends in 2022. And the data mesh came out way above everything else for last year in terms of surprises, and for impact in terms of this year.
Very interesting. For me, another important trend is this digital skills gap that we are still seeing. Salesforce released an interesting study yesterday. Their global workforce, their global skills survey, and I did a YouTube video with them yesterday about this, and the headline figure is that this new digital skills index from Salesforce reveals that 76% of global workers say they're unequipped for the future of work, which is very interesting, I think. And I feel lots of the technologies we just talked about, we talk about data science, we talk about the metaverse and extended reality, we talk about blockchain technology and Web3, and there are huge skills gaps. And even I remember I was reading a comment on my YouTube channel earlier about the video that we released yesterday on the skills gap, and someone was saying, I've just finished my bachelor degree and I feel completely unequipped. We didn't cover most of those technologies. We didn't talk about artificial intelligence. We didn't talk about data science. We didn't talk about blockchain. We didn't talk about this extended reality. So for me, there's a real challenge here. And and what is interesting is Salesforce has their own learning platform in the same way that companies like Microsoft have their own university. That what we're now seeing more and more is that lots of the tech companies are actually trying to fill this gap, because it's in their interest to have people out there that have those skills, and because schools and universities are not delivering, they give people the opportunity to do this. And for me, this whole the way we learn is changing so rapidly that we want more micro degrees, we want more online courses that we can consume in bite-sized chunks, and really starting to have this continuous learning. Because if I think the things I talked about in data science and AI 5 years ago are now completely out of date, from the languages we use to the concepts we were talking about. And innovation is now so rapid in all areas, that we have to really rethink. And I can only encourage everyone listening to make sure you just continuously learn and you close some of these digital skills gaps.
Absolutely. And, this is, I think, a big lesson of this century is that, the educational system is just not going to be able to keep up with the speed at which we're innovating. And I think I mean, it's certainly true in tech, right? But I'm pretty sure it's true in many of the other industries that you witness is, the ability that we have now to innovate in domain is just completely past the ability that schools have. And I'm talking here even, higher ed, where you just have to adapt in a way that is so much more rapid, and it's creating all types of issues on the infrastructure. And so I guess the best advice that we could give to people listening is be a constant learner. You know, there's a company called Masterclass that has, great um, courses. There's a new university I found this past week because my daughter is in college, so I'm kind of connected with the university system and kind of seeing what classes are available. But I think increasingly we're going to see these new systems where you're going to get certificates online that you're going to be able to take at your own pace, maybe faster, maybe slower than the educational system, but you're going to be in control of your learning. I think you can't now outsource that to a curriculum that maybe was created 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and that just marginally was improved. Interestingly, this concept, even after you've graduated and inside your organization, is one that we see where the volume of data, the potential of the work that can be done with data is outpacing the speed at which you can hire people that work with data. So there is here a real challenge, I think, both for the educational system, but also the leaders at organizations where, the way you used to field a particular function might need to change because the answer is no longer more people. The answer might be different types of skill set, different types of attitudes, and more education on the job can use more modern software or more modern approaches to management. So you can, in fact, take advantage of it. And I think it's organizations that'll be able to figure this out that will win in the end. It's just really hard, I think, to expect that the current system that builds who we are today in the last 20 years is going to help us build the next generation in the next 20 and 40 years.
Yeah, completely. And we are still front loading our kids with knowledge. And this was really the education system we put in place for the first industrial revolution, where we taught people skills that they would then use for the rest of their life. So once they finish school, education is finished, and they then start applying some of those skills. in in today's world, this is almost the other way around. The majority of learning will take place after we leave school, and because this idea of the half-life of your skills, when you learn a skill, how long that this becomes redundant, and this is reducing really rapidly today. And we're still I'm finding it difficult to almost defend when my kids, or when they say, why do I need to learn these things in school when we have the internet? And we were just talking about brain computer interfaces, so if you can access any knowledge in the world, is it really the best idea to spend a day in school sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher at the front that tries to drum some information into you? Or would it be better to focus on some of the skills that will actually take us further? And this is really close to my heart because I'm currently in the process of writing a book on future skills, because every conversation I have, every talk I give, when I talk about future trends, the next question is, okay, what does it mean for humans? What skills will I need in the future? And I was just looking down my list of, I identified 20 key skills, and one is digital literacy. So some of the things we talk about here, understanding some of the big trends. But then data literacy is really important. Having this ability to understand the importance of data and what we can now do with data. And then there are some others like being aware of cyber threats and so on. But then the vast majority of my 20 skills are really human skills. They are things like critical thinking, being able to make complex decisions, emotional intelligence, creativity, collaboration skills, um, even cultural awareness, building your own brand, curiosity and continuous learning, time management, and and for me, schools. If I look down this list of 20 skills that I feel are the most relevant for the future, this is not what schools are focusing on,
Yeah.
and or universities.
And it's so interesting you're talking about culture because, the majority of my conversations with data leaders today is really actually about the technology itself. It is about those attributes. There was a survey. I don't know how much you know about the work that Randy Bean does. Randy runs a consultancy company for the last 10 years. He's done the survey of the largest companies in the US. I think it's primarily a US survey, and he's asking those data leaders, what are you struggling with? 90%, I've got to pull it up. I think, oh, there you go. It's 91.9%, 92%, almost 92% of survey respondents identified culture as their greatest challenge. He's talking to chief data officers um, at large organizations. And so the interesting thing is that we know that being data driven is likely to help you surpass your goals. So it's 162% more likely to surpass your goals.
Mm,
Yet this year, he learned that only 26.5% report having achieving that goal.
mm,
And when he asks what's the reason, over 91% say culture is an issue. So is as much about the technologies that is about the people. And I guess in this case, it is a lot about developing those attributes so you can create a culture around what you're trying to achieve with data. There's a lot in that survey. In fact, I know Mike here who's commenting has made some comments on that survey as well. Um, and I see people here on comments on LinkedIn Training, which is another great platform. I know I mentioned Masterclass, but LinkedIn Training is a great one, or where you can develop this culture so you can build a data strategy that actually gets implemented. I'll give you a few other data points that I'm curious how you're going to react to this. But in this survey, we found that half the respondents, 53%, developed a corporate data strategy, but less than 60% of them report these strategies are actually yielding results. So, they come up with the strategy, but they can't get to the result. It also takes a lot more than expected to create a data strategy. While everyone expects it takes 2 to 3 years, the reality is that it takes 4 to 5 years. And then 10 years ago, while only 12% of companies reporting having a chief data officer, now 74% of organizations have a chief data officer. That's good news. But here's the trigger with the people aspect of it is the majority of them, close to the majority, 43%, report having two or more of this point. So a lot of turnaround because they're struggling to build a culture around what is it that we're trying to achieve, learn from the data, and then kind of progress to get there. Um, at this point, only 30% of organizations realize that they think of data as a business asset. So there's this huge opportunity for us not just to build the technical skills, but also to build the people skills that get you to build this data culture, which happens to be, according to these leaders, the number one issue on the way to getting business results out of data.
absolutely. Data is nowadays the single most important resource for any business, and the problem is that 90% of data strategies that I see are complete rubbish, because they are developed in a bottom-up approach where basically someone becomes a chief data officer, then goes around the organization to identify where could we possibly use data, what data have we already got, and how can we leverage that, instead of stepping back and saying, let's start this as a top-down process. Let's really start with our strategy, identify our biggest strategic challenges, our biggest questions that we want to have an answer to, and from there identify the key use cases. So you prioritize. And um, that was the reason I wrote my book on data strategy, which last year came. We published the second edition at the end of last year. which is I basically ended up completely rewriting the book because the other one was published 5 years ago and so much changed. And but the principle remains that you have to start. It has to start from your strategy and from your key business questions. And the key thing for me is that organizations need to prioritize their data projects. And if you focus on the really strategically important things and maybe a few quick wins, this is how you implement a data strategy. And when you say it takes 5 years to implement it or create a data strategy, I I have helped companies like Shell create data strategies in less than 3 months, where we went through this process. We started with the strategy, we mapped out possible projects, and then we created a strategy. And so if anyone is interested in how you do this, I've got lots of articles on my website, or if you're interested, you can read the book as well.
I think that would be very helpful because we do see, a lot of folks struggling with establishing a strategy that everyone can rally behind and then finally executing that strategy. So I think if you have a link to that, I think that's something that we got to make sure everybody sees because it's a big pain point. The three questions I always ask the leaders are around these principles, right? It's around the first question is, are you seeing everything that could impact your success, right? So, just very much like what you said, you have to have your principles, and then based on your principles, do you actually have the tooling? Are you seeing everything that you could see that today, you're making assumptions because of what you can see? In
Mm,
fact, what you should do is just imagine that you could see everything. What would you go out and achieve? And then the second is what you're seeing real, reliable, usable, and can we act on it correctly? So do you have the abilities, assuming that you're in a state where you can see everything and potentially your world is limitless? Now are you orchestrated? Right? A lot of organizations I talk to, they're like, oh, talk to me about this technology and we can talk about it all day long. The problem is if I give you this amazing fast driving car, do you actually have the driver at your organization that's going to not run that into the wall? And then finally is this idea of operationalizing and repeating at high velocity. I think is a huge struggle. I think kind of maps with what we talked about earlier, where you got the three stages of maturity. It is about realizing your potential, organizing yourself around it, and now doing it repeatedly. This last stage, I would say, probably 2% of companies in the world are able to do this cycle repeatedly, where they
mm,
can effectively execute on their strategy. So, yeah, I would say step one is figure out your strategy in a principled manner in a way that makes sense for your organization, your potential, and you can rally people behind it. And then step two and three are these things of, do you have the capacity, and then can you actually do it more than once? Right? Because we see a lot of organizations where they pick one use case, they're very successful with that, and then they kind of forget their principles and they rush to a second use case and they're less successful. So having principles from day one is probably one of the most important things. In fact, it connects with this book. I think for me, the book of the month, hyper focus. um, just to use a word that you said earlier, focusing. When everyone this month is thinking about their resolutions and probably running out of being able to execute on them, being able to hyper focus on the few things is an important attribute. This book, just for background,
if
was
you
written.
just give the name for anyone that's listening only.
Yeah, hyper focus is a book by Chris Bailey, and the subtitle is How to Work Less and Achieve More. But it's less about that. I find the book is more about the principles to reduce distractions so you can actually focus on the things that move the needle the most. And I think certainly in tech, in the data world, there are a lot of buzzwords. We've talked about it just at the beginning of this, and you could be distracted by it. And so if I think step one is shut down everything, decide what's important to you, what you're going to focus on, and then build a plan around it and kind of shut the windows, I would say, to the stuff that detracts you. He talks about some of the chemical reactions we have to social media and email and chat and all of that, and newness, right? There's a connection between I can't remember what he calls it, but this newness rush when you're doing a micro task task online by responding to an email, chatting, or reading about a new concept, and it drives a dopamine rush in your brain. But then you do that 100 times a day, and now you've completely lost focus on what is it that you're trying to get done with your life and with your work. So this is a quick book, great book to read, particularly at this time of the year where you're trying to map out what your year is going to look like, and you're
It's,
wondering, should
it's
I have these 10
fascinating.
resolutions or should I just have one?
I've not read this book, but I have literally just today finished my chapter for my new book on time management, which is one of the 20 skills, which is exactly what you've just outlined, this ability to be able to prioritize and focus and get things done. And what is what and I share how I do that with my own life. And I think it's really important to prioritize, to really, you can just simply apply this ABC method. So every morning when I look at my to-do list, I say these are the A tasks. They are really important and these need to be done today. And then I prioritize those, and then I put B tasks that I think are also important, and then C ones that can wait. And I think it's really important to focus on those and then put time limits in place to say, okay, for the next hour, I turn my notifications off and I will manage this. So today I finished my book chapter because I did exactly this. I switched everything off. I put classical music on and I started typing away. And then afterwards, you then give yourself space for social media and other distractions. And I think, especially working from home, people they have the angel on one side, the devil on one, saying we need to do this. I know there are other cooler things you can do. You can watch YouTube, you can go on TikTok. and I think winning this battle, and there are lots of strategies we can apply. And the other thing to realize is that we are not very productive for very long. There are now, I mean, Iceland has now trialed the 4-day week for the last 3 years. And what they found is that people work only 4 days instead of 5 days on the same salary. What they're and by doing this, they have actually either maintained productivity or actually increased it. So lots of research shows that we are only productive about 3 hours a day. So we need to find out when we're productive, and then actually do the tasks we need to do in those 3 hours.
And it's amazing when you read these books, it's very related to the chemical reaction in your body and how your brain works.
Mm.
There are lots of books. I mean, there's another book if you're interested on creating habits called Atomic Habits
Mm.
by James Clear, and he kind of takes from a lot of the research from folks like Charles Duhigg on the micro habits and so forth, where there's this idea of there's the habit loop, right? And the habit loop essentially has, I think at least three triggers. Is that the idea of the cue, which kind of triggers this, okay, I need to go out and solve problem X. Then there's the routine for that cue that tells you, for instance, if you wake up in the morning, maybe your cue as you're going to make coffee, the routine is you get the milk and then you turn on the coffee machine and all of that. And then there's the reward, which might be the taste of the coffee and what you drink with your coffee and so forth. But if you're able to kind of, I mean, I hate to use the word hack, but if you're able to wire your habits the same way, you really drive to repeatable productivity. So in your case, you started talking about it here, right? So I know I want to write my chapter. What that means is I block an hour of time, quiet time where I turn off my notifications. Maybe I put on my glasses. Maybe I turn down the lights. Maybe I turn on some classical music. So you're creating the routine that you can repeatedly do. And then you finish your article and now you have the reward.
Mm.
And so we don't realize that. We're not conscious about these things. But if you read literature on how to create habits, uh, if these three components are pretty critical. So there's a few books here: Atomic Habits by James Clear, and then the work by Charles Duhigg. I think it's called The Habit Loop, or Micro Habits is going to be the name of his book. Let me look it up so I can help people with this one. But particularly at this beginning of the year here, where everyone's trying to figure out how do I keep my resolutions together. Those are great things. The Power of Habit is the book by Charles Duhigg. It's a great book, actually. I have it. I have it
Very
here, actually. One of these books here, um, and you can see even my dog chewed the end of the book here. Um, It's another great book here to read if you want to kind of wire your brain and your routines on how to create habits for yourself to be productive.
Very good. Yeah, I was just looking through the books I read this month, and I feel extremely privileged that I usually get a chance to read books before they publish. And so Harvard Business Review sent me a new book by Paul Doherty, who is the Chief Technology Officer from Accenture, and James Wilson. And this one is called Radically Human, and is how new technology is transforming business and shaping our future. And I finished this yesterday, and this will come out in May, I believe, this year, April, May time. Um and the whole idea is that actually in applying all of the technology is all about being human, the human centered approach to all of this. So very well written. Put this on your pre-order list, and once it's out, is fascinating read.
It's called Radically Human, you said?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to look that up for sure.
And then I was just thinking, what else did I do this month? I had a really good session with Huawei, the South Korean car company. I spoke to their chief executive and executive team about future trends, and we explored. And they also own Kia. They also own Boston Dynamics, the robot company. So they are well into this space that we always cover, and we explored the future of cars and the future of mobility. And I have a few YouTube videos, if anyone is interested in them, on my channel as well, on the future of cars and the future of mobility. And some of the things we covered is that I don't believe that there are many industries that go through through a steeper transformation than the car industry at the moment, where I think every manufacturer is going through this transformation of Industry 4.0 and automation, and thinking about how they can apply tools in their factories like 5G and edge computing and robotics. But then what is changing for auto companies is that the product itself is also changing so rapidly that nowadays the main component of a car is software, and and the how we will use cars is going to change. That in the future we'll have much more this whole idea of mobility as a service, where you have self-driving cars and maybe self-flying drones, as well as scooters and trains and planes. And then they're going through this massive transformation in terms of electrification. But I also feel that hydrogen has a real role to play in the future. So at the moment, everyone talks about electric cars. I think hydrogen powered cars, especially trucks, ships, planes, will have a huge future. I did a live stream with a company that is developing green hydrogen powered autonomous drones that you can see on my channel. It's called The Future of Flying Taxis. And then for me, so everything is going to change in the automotive industry, and it's fascinating to see that, how they're preparing themselves for this. And then on top of this, we have the metaverse, where test drive cars in virtual reality and customize them, and potentially have a digital version of the car that you've just bought and have on your drive, and you drive around with this digital car in the metaverse as well, which you can verify through your NFT. So
Yeah.
everything is changing at the moment.
It's interesting. We're kind of closing the loop, coming back to the metaverse. We're talking about books. I think what you're talking about here, reminds me a lot of the content of this book called Competing Against Luck. I wrote a blog about this about a year and a half. It's a book written by Clayton Christensen, professor at MIT. He was the author of the Innovators Dilemma. But the concept in this book is about this idea of jobs. And what I mean by that is, what are you hiring solutions to accomplish the job? The problem has not changed. It's the way that we're addressing the problem that evolves, right? So just like you're talking about here, what we're trying to do is to be with other people, to experience life with them. On the way there, we solve that through mobility, and the way we solve that has been historically cars, and there's been cars that we drove ourselves. And then what we're realizing is actually maybe I don't need to drive the car myself. So you're slowly evolving to self-driving car. And if you have a highly populated area, maybe it's an electric bike and so forth. And then ultimately we get to this, which is, wait, I wasn't actually trying to physically move myself there. I was trying to create an experience for myself with that person. And so how can I create that reality? And so it's kind of interesting because if you center on what is the problem that we're trying to solve and see the evolution of how we go about solving the problem is pretty constant. The thing that is, you know, changing is how effectively we are actually creating that end result. And this book on competing against luck is really about that. I don't think he uses the automotive industry, but I think it's a great example of how ineffectively have we resolved a problem that was really about connecting people. And now we're realizing because we have technology that we can ultimately create it better than even having a car itself. And so
Yeah, and
exciting
whenever,
in this world too.
yes, super interesting. And whenever I talk to people about autonomous cars, they always think that this is such a long way away, and it really isn't. I was talking to a Chinese company today, and they have now created, I believe in Shenzhen in China, a 1,000 square kilometer area for autonomous driving cars, where they and usually you have smaller geofenced areas where they operate in Silicon Valley at the moment, but 1,000 square kilometers is big, and they've gone any roads in those 12 in those 1,000 square kilometers. So even the smallest, tiniest, busiest roads are now navigated by self-driving taxis in that town, which for me, I think we have to take very seriously because it will transform so many aspects of society.
Absolutely. You know, I was never a car guy before, until I got my Tesla, and then I started just getting interested in it. And I think what I realized is I'm still not a car guy. I'm more a software guy. And so, and I think also our relationships evolving with the way we're solving the problem. I mean, you know, what's difficult is changing the old infrastructure into the new one to enable the new technology, the new approach to actually fully, you know, experience its potential. It's just beyond the physical infrastructure, but it's also the habits and the institutions and the regulations in this industry. You talked about at the beginning around NFTs and cryptocurrency and so forth. That's the issue with progress, is that you can't just go to the final, you know, state just in one jump. You have to go there progressively because you do have to respect the existence of why there is this tradition, this regulation, or this way of doing it. In the case of self-driving cars, I think you're absolutely right on. I mean, you read, I live in the Silicon Valley, and you read every day about this Tesla car, you know, having this issue and so forth. We have 10 times less the level of scrutiny on regular cars. But because, you know,
I think you just cut out there, Bruno. I think we just lost you. Hopefully, we'll get you back in a minute.
I'm back, I think. My internet just cut out for a little bit.
Yes. Do you want to repeat this? You were just talking about the fact that about the regulation.
Yeah, what I was saying is, you know, this, we have to respect that and why they're in place so we can understand how we get to the next stage. You know, every day in the news you read about this idea of, you know, self-driving cars causing all these issues, but we have half the level of scrutiny of regular cars driven by people like you and me getting into accidents, right? And that's because of the focus we have. There's actually a great book, another book that I read over the break about how to understand the world. I know we're running out of time here, but I do want to share this read with people because I have it on my Kindle. It's a great book on building perspective when you're reading the news about, you know, what's real and what's not real. And it's this book here by Steven Pinker called Rationality. Rationality by Steven Pinker. And he talks about this idea that often when we make progress, we read about the negative aspect of progress in the news, but it's not at equal quantity as we see the stuff that we're used to. And so we then think that this new real thing that potentially could be beneficial of us for us ends up being perceived as negative one because there's so much more focus on it. And so it's, I think, especially for us that are in the data world, it's an interesting way to understand, okay, how does the human brain kind of consume new information, accepts it, and does something with it? So this book, Rationality by Steven Pinker, is a great way of questioning what is reality and what does it mean to be rational. Another great book to look at.
Very good. Lots of book recommendations today. I can't believe the hour has already gone. Time just goes by so quickly. This was fascinating. Another really good conversation. We will now try to do this every month. At the last Friday of every month, Bruno and I will get together and do exactly this, talk about some of the major trends, some of the recommendations, some of the things we are seeing coming up, and so on. So join us. If you want to rewatch any of the old episodes, head to my YouTube channel, or where you can also find hundreds of other videos on related topics, on future trends and business trends. As always, let us know what you think. If you ever want us to discuss specific topics, just send us an email, drop us a note in any of the social media platforms, and we are always happy to pick this up. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a fantastic Friday.
And great to see you all.
Thank you.